Well, hello everyone. We're going to do the part two of my supervillain origin story. Well, as a child, I said that my father was abusive. Now, that ended when I learned to use firearms. Yes, it did. Now, he was always, through my entire life, extremely verbally abusive. But about 7 and 7.5, he stopped hitting me because the home was surrounded by a central arsenal, and I was fully proficient by that age with firearms, and I could load a gun and do whatever I needed to with it. And at that point, he decided that perhaps I should not hit the child anymore. Now, I think as a child, I telegraphed it one time, looking at the gun, looking at him, and looking at the bed. It's not well in the arts of stealth, but I think he kind of got the idea that the thought of killing him was going through my mind, and that stopped his swinging. Yes, it did. So that ended the physical part. Now he was still starving me. That's what he decided to do, was to starve me out. And I mentioned before how at 8 years old they cut off the school lunches, and that sucked. I was totally dependent, but by then I was a bit stronger. Now, I would do chores like rake leaves, or steal tomatoes and then sell them to the old people so I could, get some wholesome food. I used to do that a lot. And once again, where we talk about my ego states, you know, the pharaoh would, of course, steal the tomatoes, and then the devil, which back then was the scavenger, started learning business skills. And, to the old people, I'd sell them things that I was stealing out of everyone's garden. Like I said, I had to make my own food every day. Now, back then, we had returnable pop bottles, and people were careless with them, and you could get pop bottles all the time, and they were a dime a piece. So, for me, that was always a gold mine. It was always a go to. Because one of the big things that I would eat all the time, because it was affordable, was White Castles. Because back then, White Castles were 25 cents each and close to my house. So if I could get $2, I could eat. And a lot of times I could get $2 out of those tomatoes. And there was a certain math and, typical things that, I could get around the neighborhood. White Castles were 25 cents. And there were some days where you only ended up with a White Castle or two. Now, there was a restaurant on the other side of this street called the House of Chili. And there, a three-way chili was $3.17. Once again, with my PTSD, I will never forget these numbers. So, that was one of my goals, because, you had spaghetti, chili, and cheese, and you had water to drink. So, it was at least three food groups. Now, if you had a really, really good day, a medium pizza was like $6.08. Now, I remember when they raised it by 30 cents and I couldn't get one that day. I was a kid and all. It's probably about 10 or 11. I mean, I about had a moment because I wasn't getting the food I wanted. I was very unhappy at that moment because sometimes that extra 30 cents was impossible to come up with. Like I said, this was a long, long time ago, and, money, back then your minimum wage was about $2.10 an hour. So, $6 and something was a few hours' wages for someone that was working a minimum wage job. So, these were the typical things that I would get to eat. There was some other things around the neighborhood, but those three things were my basic math of keeping something in my belly, and most of the time it was the White Castles. Because as I mentioned, I could, they're 25 cents each, so for $2 I could get 8, and fill my little belly. Now, there was a few places to where I know I could slip in an open window and steal a couple cans out of their cupboard, and I did that a lot. And I learned the places to pick, and that is how I learned the fine art of breaking and entering. That's all where I can look at a building and they say, what would be the best way in? I mean, like where I got therapy at. I mean, they put up these big doors, security systems, and I mean, they right around the corner. There's an easy 1970s styles window to get in. The kind that I always got into all the time as a kid. I mean, they spent all of that money, and like I said, it took me 2 seconds. I pointed it out to them. I'm like, you understand that all of this is useless because, and then I showed my support worker at the time that, your high-tech security system and all is crap. I mean, I could get in this place in under 2 minutes. And then I showed them how. So, that was my childhood. And, as a child, growing up, you begin to wire yourself. So, it's second nature. I don't break in places, but I sure do know how easily. You can point to any place and I'll show you how to get around their security. Because later on in my life, that was one of my fortes. I've bragged that outside of an institution, like the police or, the hardened systems, I can get around anything. There just aren't ways that they have thought about. Sometimes you got to do a little out of the box thinking. But, out of the box thinking really isn't that hard once you get used to it. Now, once again, as a child, trying to come up with food every day, there was a lot of out of the box thinking. So that is one of my assets. I do think outside of the box. Now, during all of this, the core ego state was very much shutting down. And then the other ego states that existed starting reforming themselves. And an interesting thing happened, okay, as a child. I stopped crying. Yes, I did. I stopped showing many of the traits that you would think that a normal child would have. Now, as a child, they said I was a very good kid because I just sat there. I didn't play. That was from the complex PTSD. These were aspects that I'd already told in therapy where we kept going backwards and, finding PTSD. I didn't play as a child. Now, I'm trying to think about when it was. I was probably about 4 years old, and the little neighbor girl, very demanding young little blonde girl, literally grabbed my hand, made me get up and then play. I didn't know how to play, and my therapist did say that I didn't have a childhood. And a part of my therapy is to do childish things. So sometimes I do express that on YouTube. Do you hear that? There's about to be a big storm. Yes, that large boom that you heard was lightning and thunder. So, fortunately, we're making a video and not uploading it, so we may have the power go out during the filming of this because it sounds like it's heading this way. And that's where the power comes from. But I do digress. So, things are what they are. And my mother, of course, her thing in life was trying to inflict all of her fears into you. Here another one. And by 12, I almost started to develop an anxiety disorder. And then once again, remember how I said my ego states were forming their own system, because as one of my mods mentioned in my last video in the comments, the mind will do what it has to protect itself. So one of the ego states became the driver. And it was a little bit of a surprise at 50 years old that my therapist told me that my driver wasn't my core ego state. We'll talk about that in a different video. But it is what it is. But to defend itself, the adventurer, took up, basically day-to-day brain work. What we would consider all the conscious thought that a mind does, and everybody else is a bit player. Yes, it turns out that one of my bit players, pieces of me in the mind, became the dominant one, the adventurer. And at 13 years old, my balls dropped. And then unfortunately, in the asshole world that we lived in, there became the transformation from the adventurer into the rattlesnake. And it's much nicer. Now, once again, everything developed into a system. The knight is also a warrior. He's very honorable. When you teach combat, that is the knight. He eats that shit up. Now, on the other hand, the rattlesnake is a free-form brawler. Yes, he is. Now, if I have to be in a professional setting, the knight will engage in the warfare. You hear the big thunders? Now, the rattlesnake, however, is very asymmetrical. Now, it does turn out that troubleshooting does end up better than discipline. I mean, sorry to say. Now, of course, my intelligence, I'm sure, has a factor in that. Because discipline is important. It's like force. I only use enough force unless I'm teaching a special lesson. And once I said, once the balls dropped, then all of a sudden aggression starts coming into the personality. And in reality, the rattlesnake is also a storyteller. I mean, he has very good skills. He is also the rider. But he is also the butt kicker. Now, once again, where I say I'm psychologically unique. You see, I am holding this in my left hand. Why? Because I am left-handed. Now, another thing of my uniqueness, I can throw with both hands. We're not sure why. Got a few ideas, but, they're just that. They're just a few ideas. I would really have to find some sort of neurological professional to tell me what's going on, because I don't understand it. But, yes, I can throw with both arms. Now, it does turn out that, as you see, I'm holding this camera in my left hand because I'm left-handed. But I throw much better with my right arm. And I don't miss. Now, the interesting thing is with my left arm, I throw overhand. Now, with my right arm, I throw sidearm. And I throw much better at perfect accuracy. And at high speed. I learned that playing sports. I had a little problem, because once again, like with batting, I can throw with both hands, but I can't bat both ways. I can't switch hit. So like I say, that's something that I would like someone with more knowledge to explain to me, because people are not supposed to be able to do this. Another big boom, but I do. Like I say, I'm left-handed. I can't eat with any hand but my left hand. Yes, or wipe my butt. But that's TMI, but you're getting it anyway. But like I say, I throw with perfect accuracy with this hand. I can really whip it too. Now, in a pinch, I can throw with my left, but it's less than ideal. So once again, I don't understand that. That's another part of my uniqueness. Now, as a child, in the 70s, they did series of tests. And when they did a manual agility test called the Gatsby test, I completed it in easy time with a lot of time. And when they stopped, all the other kids were only about halfway through the board. So, I have shown even then through testing that I have an incredible agility compared to everyone else, and that worked really good in the workplace, which, we're going to talk about in later vlogs. But, like when I was an assembler, oh yeah, I was the best one they had. That got me a lot of choice assignments too. And because I was the best one at it, I always got the trainee. And I always had the best trainees because, once again, I used my Magus ego state and sat down and trained them well. My devil ego state would make them comfortable with the job. And my rattlesnake ego state would calm them down with a little bit of humor, because we were working in teams of 2 at 80 to 120 pieces a minute. And there were 2 other guys in the plant that could work at the same speed I could. The maximum of 120 a minute. And if we worked next to each other, we could give each other bathroom breaks because we could each cover the whole line. And to be all honest too, is we also used to hide a pipe behind the toilet, and we would do it in tag teams and smoke a bowl at work because we had smoking restrooms. I'm going to leave this at that because we're getting pretty far in here. And then we'll have a part 3 later that, we'll talk about my latter teen years. Now, everyone, please put your comments below and have a good night.